Hi everyone, welcome to this Introduction to Object-Oriented Programming. This is for complete beginners, so if you already have experience of object-oriented programming in Java, this video might not be for you. Okay, we're going to start with an extremely basic scenario where our computer program is storing 3 items of data related to a student, okay? In fact, let's extend that idea a little bit and create 3 more variables for another student. So now our computer program is going to process 6 variables. Of course, every time I create a new student, I have to think of different variable names, which is a little bit annoying sometimes. But it's okay. I only have 2 students. But what if I have 10 students? Or 100 students, or 1,000 students? That's going to be tricky to manage all of those different variables. Now, one technique which Java offers to help us solve this kind of problem is object-oriented programming. Wouldn't it be great if, in my computer program, I could do this? Wouldn't it be great if I could create a new kind of data type called student and use it to construct a new digital student object in computer memory? In fact, wouldn't it be great if, when I construct a new student object, I give it some data to store, just to get started? Okay, so what I mean by that is, wouldn't it be great if I could do this? Okay, so when I construct a new student, I give it some data to store. I pass it some data as parameters. Okay, so if we were to visualize that idea, this is what it might look like. Let me turn off the original idea. Okay. So here we've got a new student object in computer memory, and inside that object we are storing a string, an integer, and a double. Okay, name, age, and GPA. My computer program can communicate with this object because we have a variable here which is assigned to the object. So I can communicate with it. We can extend that idea by constructing another student, okay? And we'll send it this student's information. Again, we have a string, an integer, and a double, but the information is different. And if we were to visualize that, this is what it might look like. Here we have another student object which stores a string, an int, and a double, name, age, and GPA. So we can see that every student has a name, an age, and a GPA. The information, however, may be different. And we also know that we can communicate with each object if they have an identifier. So, with that in mind, let's continue our computer program. We could now do something like this. I could do system.out.println s1 dot. So s1 is referencing this object. So s1 dot name or age or GPA, you choose. I'm going to do name. Okay. And of course, I could also do this. s2 dot name, because s2 also has a property called name. Okay, we could also do some interesting logic. For example, let's have a look at the syntax for Java's if-else statement. That's the syntax. Now let's put the logic in, the condition. If s1 dot GPA is greater than s2 dot GPA, then we can say system.out.println s1 dot name is smarter than s2 dot name. Okay? And of course, the else condition would just be the opposite of that. Else s2.name is smarter than s1.name. Okay? Now look how elegant, really, my computer program is. I've got 2 lines of code here constructing digital objects which are storing sets of data related to students, and then I can process that data in a computer program by using the variables which reference the objects. In this instance, it's S1 and S2. So let's move into our IDE and see how to set this scenario up in Java. One interesting thing we're going to be doing is looking at how to classify a student. We need to be able to classify or define what a student object will look like. So that's one thing that we're going to do now. So I'm going to jump into my IDE. I'm using Eclipse. The first thing I'm going to do is open a new Java project. I'm just going to call this student project. And now that we have our student project, hopefully there are no source files yet. It's empty. So let's create a new class file. This will be the main program. I'm just going to call it student project as well. It doesn't really matter what you call it, I don't think. But this class file is going to be my main program. And there we have it. Static void main string, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Now we're going to create another class file which will be used to define what a student object looks like. Okay? So this is the student class. Notice in Java, when you're creating a new class, make sure the first letter is capital. Okay? It's not a main class, so you don't need to check that box for the student class. So let's start designing our student class file. The first thing we're going to design are the class properties. Some people will call it class variables, or some people will call it class attributes. It's all the same thing. And we know that every student has a name, an age, and a GPA. Okay? Done. Those are the class properties. The next thing we're going to design is called the constructor method. And you may be asking yourself, what does method mean? Method really just means function. But when we're designing classes, we just use the word method. Okay? So kind of get used to that. What is the constructor method, by the way? Well, the constructor method is this thing here. I know it's the constructor method because it has the same name as the class name, or you can think of it as like a data type. Okay, this is the constructor method. And in this example, our constructor method has 3 parameters: a string, an integer, and a double. Okay, so let's design that. Interestingly, the constructor method doesn't return anything, and we don't need to use the word void like we did before with functions that don't return anything. We just don't write anything for the constructor method. Simply public student. Okay, now remember, the student constructor method has 3 parameters: a string, an integer, and a double. These are the parameters. Now let's think of some identifier names. The string is a name, the integer is an age, and the double is a GPA. Why do I have to think of new variable names? It's so annoying. I'm just going to use name, age, GPA. Done. Okay. Now what I want to do is store this data in this class variable. That will give it some permanent storage. Okay, so I want to say name equals name. Name will be assigned this parameter name. That's a bit confusing, right? Because they have the same identifier. So to get around that in Java, we can do this. This .name is the class property, and it's being assigned this parameter. Okay? So we're sending this data into this class variable for safe storage. And we can do the same with age and GPA. Bingo! We've just designed the student class. That's it. So far. More to come later. But here we have a class which has 3 properties. And when we construct a new student, we call this method the constructor method. And it will assign some data to the class variables for storage. And then we can process that data later. Okay? So let's go back into our student project and let's see if we can now do this. Can we construct some student objects? So the data type is student. I'm just going to use S1 as the identifier, and we're going to construct a new student object. Let's call the constructor method, and we're going to send it a string, an integer, and a double. Now let's construct another one. This guy is Joe, who is also 16 and is, I think, at a GPA of 3.6. Now let's do some logic. If S1.GPA is greater than S2.GPA, then system.out.println S1.name is smarter than S2.name. Okay, else let's just copy that into there and just say S2.name is smarter than S1.name. Wow, there's my computer program. Very elegant. Does it work? Let's run it and see what happens. Joe is smarter than Jack. Let's do this. Just before we finish today, I'm just going to go into Jack's. So remember, Jack is S1. And I'm going to say S1.GPA is now 3.7. Let's update Jack's GPA. And then we'll run this code again. Hopefully we're going to see Jack is now smarter than Joe. Jack is smarter than Joe. So using this variable here, S1, I can communicate with the object and process data in the object. Okay? So that's a very brief introduction to object-oriented programming. Have a go and see if you can get it working.